r/is credit. Are you for or against the death penalty, and why? Conceptually for, I find no moral issue about removing people so incredibly dangerous or depraved there's no realistic hope of rehabilitation. Even if it's a mental health issue, there comes a point where leaving them alone is more hazardous and costly to society. Examples: Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer. Practically against, the current justice system in my country, US, is so riddled with flaws it can't be relied upon to make this type of decision with the absolute accuracy and control necessary to be comfortable it's only being used where needed or appropriate. It needs to stop until we can clean things up significantly, which I have no faith can happen due to entrant issues. Many that live deserve death. And some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment. Gandalf of all people. Against, only because false accusations and framing are a thing. Against for several reasons. 1. Everything has a margin of error, even if it's small. Some people who are convicted are going to be innocent. 2. Governments always have the potential to be corrupt, biased, incompetent, or some combination of the three. I don't want to give the government, especially in light of such potential shortcomings, the right to take people's lives. 3. It's more expensive than life in prison, at least in the US, not sure if this applies everywhere. 4. While I understand the emotional desire of the victim's family to want revenge, I don't think the government should be in the business of enacting revenge. 5. It doesn't actually deter crime. 6. At least for the US, torture is prohibited. While in theory there may be ways to execute someone without engaging in torture, the US has proven that we are not able to consistently ensure that this happens. There have been numerous cases where executions have been botched and the person in question suffered before dying. Again, I get why some people emotionally may not see an issue with this, but constitutionally we should. I'm not someone you'll typically see making small government arguments, but the state absolutely should not have the power to decide who lives and who dies. Way too many things that can go wrong. Generally against because as far as I'm aware. 1. It's expensive. 2. It doesn't discourage people from committing the crimes it's a punishment for. Crimes of passion. 3. Vengeance, contrary to what people believe, doesn't make people happier. 4. If you get it wrong there's no going back, and you will get it wrong at least sometimes. The main situation I see it being possibly logical is if the continued existence of that person was an ongoing danger to society. X, a brutal mafia boss who would be able to be covertly directing the organization from behind bars. Otherwise I don't really see the merits rationally. The only other counter-argument I've heard is that it's more cruel to leave people in prison for life than it is to kill them. Apparently this is how some African leaders reacted to hearing that Europeans would lock people up in prison for years. They felt it to be more cruel than death. Against. Too many innocent people get thrown in jail in this country. https://innocenceproject.org/all-cases. Against. Not for any moral reason, but studies show it's cheaper to keep an inmate incarcerated for life rather than administer the death penalty. Plus, from a purely punitive standpoint, spending life in a tiny cell never at peace because you are surrounded by predators is worse than death. Edit, for the idiots claiming I make shit up. Study 1, 2016 Susquehanna University study found on average death row inmates cost $1.12 million more than general population inmates. Study 2, I'll grant you it's older but, Loyola University of Los Angeles Law Review. Florida has estimated that the true cost of each execution is approximately $3.2 million, or approximately 6 times what it would cost to keep the person in prison for life. Against because I have no faith in the government to prosecute these cases properly and not make mistakes. I'm amazed that so many Americans into freedom and small government are totally into giving the state power to kill people. Against. The government should not have the authority to kill citizens as a punitive measure. 4. But only in extreme cases. Like multiple murders. I think the worst punishment is rotting in prison, but people who can willingly kill multiple people don't need to be in the world anymore. There was a case a couple of years ago where the father had raped and beaten his 9-month-old infant daughter to death. People like that shouldn't be allowed to breathe same air as the rest of us. I've seen so much evil in the world, whether or not the criminal fears it is irrelevant to me. I say one less crazy to worry about whether they're behind bars or not. It's safer for them to be below ground than among us. So many folks in here saying they are for the death penalty so long as we are 100% sure the defendant did it, as if every single one of these exonerations didn't start with a jury of the defendant's peers agreeing they were guilty behind a reasonable doubt. Against, there are socially negative consequences to state-sanctioned bloodlust. I don't see it as any different than the masses watching public executions in the Colosseum. The state has the power to keep criminals safely detained away from the rest of society, so killing an offender is never necessary. State executions only degrade the entire population by insinuating that physically harming another person should somehow reverse the harm and trauma of a crime they may have committed. When the state itself uses violence as a way to solve problems, it only legitimates and propagates the idea and ideology to the entire population that violence can get you what you want. Violence only begets more violence, so state executions are counterproductive in and of themselves. Against, I can't understand why a developed country like the USA still has it, TBH. Every other Western country abandoned it 50 years ago. 1 out of every 10 people sent to death row in the US is exonerated and released. There have been around 1,500 executions since 1977 and around 150 exonerations. Would you trust an airplane that crashed once out of every 10 flights? It's also racially and financially prejudiced. Rich people are very rarely executed. It's also unconstitutional. Americans convicted of capital offenses receive different sentences, according to which state they committed the crime in. The cost is also insanity. California abandoned the DP a couple of years ago, after learning that each execution since 1977 had cost taxpayers $300 million. Google, cost of executions in California. Most of all, it dehumanizes us all. It is a barbaric practice that belongs in the past. Against, it fails in almost every measurable metric of quality. It's expensive, as should it, rightfully so, costs a lot to execute a person because of its special appeals process. They get a bunch of them cause, killing an innocent person ain't great. Even prisoners who serve life sentences and die of old age cost the taxpayers less. It doesn't deter crime. There is no statistical link between states that employ the death penalty and a reduction in violent crime. Why is that? Debatable, but the current thinking is it's because murder is, for the most part, a crime of passion. The consequences don't really deter someone from pulling the trigger in the moment. It's super racist. The death penalty is not applied evenly across racial demographics. Surprised PK face, I know. Even when people are like, well, X group murders more, it still isn't applied evenly. Factoring that in, it's more often applied to poor people. In another shocker, the death penalty is disproportionately applied to poor murderers than rich murderers. Rich murderers get good lawyers who either get them off in trial or can work the verdict down to years and not the needle. We're not that great at actually making sure everyone we execute is guilty. Yeah, sure, there's some guys out there where they catch them on video with someone's shin bone in their mouth or something, or it's someone who confesses and laughs about it. But we execute a startling amount of folks where like 5 years later we go, oh oopsie, it was actually the neighbor instead. Are bad, dead bro. Even if the ratio is like 100 guilty to 1 innocent, you would really be totally cool just killing 1 completely innocent person to stick it to 100 people? It's a lot easier to say it's not perfect, but we try our best, when it's a stranger being falsely convicted. But how many people out here would seriously sacrifice their parent, spouse, or child if it meant that a bunch of serial killers died at age 50 in the chair instead of 70 in a supermax cell? I remember when I was in high school, I was pro-death penalty and got assigned in debate class to argue against it. And I did the research and was just shocked at how one-sided it all was. When you take out the personal feeling side of things, it just doesn't make sense. Anyway, I get why it exists. Justice boners are a thing. Eye for an eye. Whatever. It just feels bad when you read about someone who killed like 10 kids or something dies in their sleep in a cell. It sucks. I feel it too. But I'm a person. Government processes should, in theory, be held to a higher standard than my own desire for vengeance. *** note, I'm from the US. Not sure how some of these metrics, like cost, stack up in countries where they have the trial and then, like, shoot you in the head the next week. I'm against it as it is inhumane and the taking of a human life isn't justice for murder. Also, the death penalty costs a lot more taxpayer money than locking that person up for life. Against. It's wrong no matter how you look at it. You risk killing an innocent person, and if someone is actually guilty, don't they deserve to suffer in prison, as opposed to being relieved of that suffering by dying? Makes no sense. Batman should kill Joker. I am of the mind that there are some individuals too dangerous to be left alive like Adamar or Bin Laden, and there is no other recourse other than for the death penalty. And #X200B. But I would only reserve the death penalty for truly heinous crimes or treason, and it must be beyond any shadow of a doubt they did it. I don't know if there is a higher standard than that, but something higher only reserved for the absolute worst of humanity. I don't think state-funded vengeance makes any sense at all. I understand the emotion behind people who want criminals dead, but the people that support the death penalty are the same crowd of people that say things like "fuck your feelings." So I just think the death penalty is a filthy mess of hypocrisy. Why do we kill people that killed people? To show people that killing people is wrong. Easy. Have an innocent person ever got executed? Yes, that's why I am against it. 4. I don't like humans. Yes, I'm pro, but only for sexual crimes. Even murder is justified at times. Rape, pedophilia, trafficking and zoophilia are just inexcusable. State-sanctioned murder is bad. Regardless of my personal feelings. From balls to brains, it's just employees of the state being given the authority to end a human life. We should all abhor this process. We know it's not an effective deterrent. We know innocent people slip through. It doesn't matter if I think someone should forfeit their life for their crimes. It shouldn't involve law, government, or people who just filled out an application. It simply comes down to this: is it wrong to kill someone or not? I'm against it because it just seems inhumane. How are you any better than the murderer if you've killed more people? Not to mention, if the person was wrongly accused, then you just sent an innocent man to his death. Death penalty to rapists convicted guilty beyond reasonable doubt, or at the very least castration. Rape is a crime that literally has no excuse or moral reason why it was done. A murder could have been in self-defense. A theft could have been due to a desperate person wanting to bring home food to their child. These aren't excuses to forgive and forget those crimes, but they at least have some nuances on it. Rape. None. Especially pedophilic rape. They deserve the slowest, most painful death. I'm against it because I don't trust the government. I am against it. Why? Because it is unneeded, impractical, and expensive. I know some victim families feel like the killing of a criminal brings closure or justice, but I think that is a rather repulsive point of view that plays towards the darker side of humanity. Too much of world's history's greatest shames were justified by the idea of someone, or some people, deserving to die. Against because I am deeply uncomfortable with the bureaucratic apparatus dispassionately taking someone's life. Don't care what they did. I'd be more for it if it was in the form of, say, a public hanging, since that at least wouldn't let society hide from it. Or if they randomly picked a member of the public who had to do it. Against, but because of the systemic injustice in the judiciary system. One can be wrongfully accused of a crime. Considering how many people on death row have been exonerated by DNA testing and the Innocence Project, I can't see how anyone could support the death penalty. I would rather let 1,000 killers loose than have the state murder one innocent person. Against. For multiple reasons. For one, the American prison system was a creation response to slavery ending. Then you have the now, which has many states that let private prisons to exist. We know for a fact that BIPOC are more likely to be locked up. There has been countless times where people are wrongly convicted. I find it very hard to say that death penalty should be legal when there are many systemic issues within the prison system and the US government. Women can't have an abortion easily, black people get shot and killed before ever being allowed due process. I'm aware that it's used in serious case, but I find it hard to believe that it's the only part of the system that somehow got it right and never made a mistake, not to mention the fact that killing people in any manner is inhumane, and I don't think it does anything for society other than let people keep being awful. I believe many systems need to be completely changed. But no, I cannot say that even if a person murder one person or a million, that killing them is going to solve anything. If anything, it actually has been proven to be more costly than sending someone to prison for life. Against. Murder is rarely justified, and even if it is 100 times, there's always going to be one where it isn't, or a mistake in the legal system, or someone who's made an example of. Against. If the point of prison is to rehabilitate, then the death penalty does nothing. If their point of prison is to punish, then the death penalty does nothing. Statistically, it does nothing to deter crime. It costs taxpayers a ton. Although I think it would be okay in some heinous cases where there is no shadow of a doubt and the relatives of victims want that, generally speaking I am against it because 1. Innocent people, especially minorities, get convicted. 2. If the religious right doesn't want abortion, they shouldn't be able to kill adults.